Jimmy Hoffa is at the center of one of the most notable unsolved missing person cases in America. The famed and powerful labor leader in the early 70s went missing on July 30th in 1975. And if you're familiar with the case, you know that on this day, his body has never been found, and authorities haven't agreed on an explanation for what actually happened. This Live Now and Then special takes a look back at Hoffa's disappearance and the rise of his notoriety. We'll start with footage from this archive special, which aired on Channel 2 WJBK in Detroit on July 30th, 1976, marking the one-year anniversary of his disappearance.
The Marcus Red Fox restaurant has had a lot of attention this past year, not just because of the food and service, but because of its location here at Maple and Telegraph. This parking lot is the last place anyone not connected with the Hoffa case remembers seeing Jimmy Hoffa. Hoffa did have an appointment here the day he disappeared. His car was found in this parking lot. Now, perhaps he thought the meeting was to discuss his re-election as president of the Teamsters. Maybe he thought he was going to patch up some differences of opinion with an old prison mate. Maybe he thought he was just going to meet friends here. And maybe someone did pull up beside Jimmy Hoffa in a 1975 Mercury and open the door for him. And maybe he did get in. All of those things are maybes. But there is one certain fact in all of this, and that is that 1 year ago today, Jimmy Hoffa disappeared, and no one has heard from him since.
No violent action will take place against me.
Except for those involved with Hoffa's disappearance, Hoffa's wife, Josephine, was probably the first to realize he was missing and to fear something terrible. Despite his rough, tough reputation, Hoffa was a dedicated father and husband. Jo, as she was called, was always telephoned by Hoffa, but on July 30th, Hoffa called only once at 2:30 p.m. to say that his appointment had not shown and that he would probably be home about 4. According to Hoffa's biographer, Oscar Fraley, Mrs. Hoffa really didn't become frightened until that night, about 10 p.m. That's when she called Joe Bain, a Teamster official and a longtime family friend. He came out to the house, then called Jimmy Hoffa Jr. on vacation in Traverse City, and Hoffa's daughter, Mrs. Barbara Kranzer, in St. Louis. By the next morning, the Hoffa children had arrived at the home, and at 6:30 that night, a missing person report on James Hoffa was filed. Within the hour, a horde of reporters, photographers, police, and curious onlookers descended on the quiet Lake Orion home, and they would keep that vigil for weeks to come. Little would come of it. Occasional glimpses of family members, a few statements by young Jim Hoffa, now head of the family, a steady parade of Teamster officials and police investigators. Even Chucky O'Brien came, but just once, on that first night when Jim accused him of knowing something about his father's disappearance. O'Brien stormed out, always claiming his innocence, calling himself a foster son of the Hoffas. But in later months, various authorities were to share some of the suspicion about O'Brien and his whereabouts on July 30th. I've been told that when he was home, it was nothing unusual to see Jimmy Hoffa out in the backyard grooming the trees and bushes, playing with grandchildren. But none of that happened last August. The family tried to keep up a brave exterior despite the lack of clues, the terrible silence, and the rumors of death grew stronger. Even Jimmy Hoffa Jr.'s hold on hope began to wither. He gave up that hope on September 9th.
At this late date, after the time that's gone by, I think that it's clear that my father has been assassinated and that we're probably never going to see him again or find the body. And I think all this was part of a calculated plot by whoever did this. It was a highly organized endeavor.
Jimmy Hoffa has since been declared legally dead, but that day didn't come until 1982, 7 years after his disappearance. In the meantime, Michigan residents were eager to help, with many calling in tips and some even taking their own chances at searching for Hoffa's body. The Hoffa family had offered a generous $200,000 reward, which helped get people talking from all across the country.
The large-scale effort to find the missing union boss began here at his home. This is where young Jim Hoffa came outside during the first few days to keep us posted. This is where he announced the $200,000 reward for finding his dad. It's also where he announced the Where's Jimmy Hoffa bumper sticker campaign here. This is where the first anonymous calls and extortion threats came in. After those calls and after pressure from the Hoffa family, the FBI set up a command post inside the house, including phones, radio equipment, TV, and cots. But up until the command post was set up, the Bloomfield Township Police Department was handling the investigation. The tips began pouring in there after Hoffa's son made a plea for information during the first night we were camped out at the Hoffa house. During the next few days, the search focused on the shopping center behind the Macus Red Fox restaurant. FBI agents canvassed shoppers who might have seen something, anything at all.
He asked me if we were here last Wednesday, and I said yes, that we're here practically every day. And he asked if we had seen a green Grand Prix with a light green top, and he showed us Mr. Hoffa's picture and told us he was wearing a navy blue suit, and asked if we had seen him parked somewhere over here to the left of Marcus's there. And we racked our brains and tried to think if we had, but we hadn't, unfortunately.
They showed me pictures of the car and Jimmy Hoffa. They asked me if I saw him, but I didn't.
As I was getting out of my car, a gentleman asked me if I had been at lunch at Macus's last Wednesday or in this vicinity. And I said no, I hadn't, that I lived not far from here, and I often went to lunch at Macus's, but not last Wednesday.
Tips on where to find Hoffa or his body came from every corner of the country. Temptation to phone in a Hoffa tip grew as the reward money grew to $325,000. Among the suggested methods of finding Hoffa were ESP, body reading, astrological charts, radionics, mysticism, and witchcraft. A month after the disappearance, there was a retirement party for Boyd Simmons, originator and director of the Detroit News Secret Witness Program.
I've never seen as many screwballs and show everybody who has a crystal ball or thinks he has got in touch with us.
More so than in any other murder case?
More so than all the rest put together.
Why do you think that was?
I don't know. I think that Hoffa was so well known, and so were some of the other people whose names appeared in it, that it became kind of a joke.
As Simmons' retirement party was filling the Detroit Press Club with merriment, two Senate investigators were on their way to Michigan. Though they stayed somewhat secluded at the Holiday Inn in Southfield for a week, their mission was to dig for Jimmy Hoffa's body in suburban Waterford Township. They had a secret informant, later identified as Harry Hall, alias Harry Haller, alias Harry Health Guy. He had told them where to look. The tip was received by a subcommittee of Senator Scoop Jackson, supposedly because the mob wanted the body found to take the heat off them. The investigators, Keith Atkinson and William Gallinero, never did find anything in Waterford Township, though they followed their informant's treasure map instructions implicitly. The presence of the investigators drew out the amateur sleuths, who used shovels, sticks, and even spoons to search for Hoffa's body. Once again, their motivation was probably the reward money, although some of them said there were other reasons. What are you doing out here?
Looking for adventure, I guess.
And money?
Yeah.
You really think you're going to find it?
I doubt it. They'll probably get it police will probably get it before I do.
In 1975, Vince Wade, an investigative reporter at that time, broke the news that Hoffa had disappeared. Here's a look at that conversation about that day in history.
You know, before we get into the disappearance, what do you remember about that day, your assignment? Walk me through it.
That afternoon, as I was just getting ready to go home, I was exhausted and I was really looking forward to, frankly, going to bed early that night. Just as I was packing up to head out the door to the parking lot, my pager went off and it said call, I don't remember the number, let's say it's 231. And that wasn't a familiar number to me. And I had a cheat sheet, a little black book, if you will, in my pocket of the codes that I had signed to various people that I dealt with in the news business. And so I had to look up 231, and it turned out to be a lieutenant in the Michigan State Police Organized Crime Section. Now, this guy was a tough old cop who never had given me a break or a tip on anything. He absolutely just would not call me with any information. Well, he's calling me. So before I left, I immediately called him up, and he got right to the point. He says, I thought you'd like to know Jimmy Hoffa has disappeared. And we think it's a legitimate case. We found his car at the Macus Red Fox restaurant up in Bloomfield Township. and the car is at the Bloomfield Township Police Garage right now, but there's no sign of Jimmy. And so I dashed into the news director's office, told him what was going on. I dashed right back out and sat down at a typewriter. We had typewriters in those days. And I banged out a fast bulletin and raced down the hall to the voiceover booth, the audio booth. And I did a bulletin, broke into programming, did a bulletin. And then I ran back to the newsroom, grabbed a camera crew. That was film in those days, not video. I grabbed a film crew and we raced up to the Bloomfield Township Police Station, and they let us in the garage so we could take pictures of, shoot video or film, excuse me, shoot film of Hoffa's car. And then we shot pictures of the Macca's Red Fox restaurant, which was not too far away. And then we raced back to the station. I did a story for the late news, and I worked 7 days a week for months after that.
Wow. What was your reaction to finding out that news and experiencing that unfold?
Well, the adrenaline starts pumping, and you know that it's big news. And the other thing to put into context here is Jimmy Hoffa was a tough guy. He was polite. He was a gentleman, but he knew how to use his fists because he had been a labor organizer for years and had dealt with management goon squads, and so he had his share of picket line fights. So what I'm saying is Jimmy was no pushover guy. He was rough and tough, but he was also very polite and a gentleman. But he was rough and tough if he needed to be. So it was hard to square that Jimmy Hoffa could be kidnapped. But yet he was not the kind of guy who would just disappear. He was not a whip. He'd stand up to anything. And so, your mind you're trying to reconcile what's going on between his reputation and what we all knew him to be versus the news that the police were putting out. It was just, it was a jumble of your mind racing, trying to reconcile what's going on here. Trying to make sense of it.
Well, and how powerful organized crime was at that time? Was Hoffa's disappearance, would you say it was shocking to you?
Oh, sure. And, it took a few days to figure out that this was a mob operation or mafia. We for a while there, we're just, where is he? What happened to it? We explored the possibilities. Was he having marital trouble? No. Was he having any problems at the union? No. So we were for the weekend. This was late in the week. On the weekend, we spent the weekend trying to call everybody we knew that knew Jimmy Hoffa and just say, what do you think this is about? And everybody was puzzled. We didn't know. But the mafia was much more powerful than it is today. And quite frankly, the reason the mafia has faded is because of the Hoffa case.
I mean, obviously this remains unsolved, but years later, society is still just so fascinated with this. There are so many theories out there about what happened to him. What are your thoughts on that?
Now, in every major city, organized crime usually has some piece of the action on sanitation, on refuse collection. And that gives them a perfect opportunity with these big sanitation yards to completely destroy a body. And that was one of the theories in the Hoffa case, and it happens to be the one that I subscribe to. So do a bunch of the investigators that were involved in the case. The main guy that they think killed Hoffa was a mafia / Teamster from New Jersey named Sal Bagulio, who's deceased now. He died suddenly, so to speak, lead poisoning. He got shot 4 times in Little Italy in Manhattan.
What would you say is one of the most poignant moments or something that you just remember from covering this so extensively?
Oh, I would say I don't know if it would be poignant, but I just remember the lineup outside the jail after the New Jersey guys were hauled back to Detroit to appear before the witnesses in a lineup situation. You know, here they were in the flesh, and we saw them for the first time. And you know, I was thinking, you know, this might be the only time we ever see the guy who killed Jimmy Hoffa. We don't know which one of them it was. Turned out that everybody eventually zeroed in on Sal Bagulio. But my thought was, these are the guys.
Thank you so much for talking with me and breaking this all down. Is there anything else you want to tell our viewers before I let you go about your experience covering this?
Well, I like to tell people that I'm the reporter who broke the story that Jimmy Hoffa disappeared, and he's still missing.
While it may be nearly 5 decades since his disappearance, many people are still invested in trying to solve the case.
Scott
Bernstein, an investigative reporter and crime historian, is one of those individuals. He believes he knows who may have killed Jimmy Hoffa and where. Here's a look at that interview.
Before we get into the whole disappearance itself, can you walk me through why Jimmy Hoffa was considered just such a iconic and notable figure at that time?
Yeah, I mean, he was practically a head of state. His worldwide notoriety was up there with, you know, presidents and kings, movie stars, athletes. He was someone that, if you were growing up or you know, around in the 50s and 60s and 70s, he's somebody that was on your television set every night on the nightly news. He was someone that dominated headlines. He was a very in your face type of personality. He didn't back down from cameras. He enjoyed cameras, and he was a volatile individual with a lot of volatile associates, and that was, you know, back then in the glory era of the mafia, that was like catnip to journalists and people that ran newspapers and television stations. So he was someone, by becoming the head of the Teamsters, which made him really the face of the working man, not just in America but around the globe, because the Teamsters were international. That had a lot of juice, and he was someone that wanted to kind of bathe in the adulation and the notoriety, and eventually some of that high profile attitude and swagger, and being in a lot of ways a rebel, uh, laid the foundation for what happened to him in 1975, and his ultimate demise.
Yeah, and of course, that's a good segue because on July 30th, 1975, he disappeared. What have you learned and uncovered in your research about his disappearance?
Well, I'm very proud to say that I believe that I've been able to uncover where Jimmy Hoffa was taken to and murdered, and I believe that I've been able to uncover who was the person that pulled the trigger. I don't think neither of or either of those two parts of the narrative had really been out there until I came on the scene about 15, 16 years ago, through building, you know, my database of sources, and being able to get access to files in the government that most people aren't able to see, and really gaining the trust of both the people that work the case in the FBI and in the U.S. Attorney's Office, as well as gaining the trust of the guys on the street, the mob guys that actually pulled this off or were connected to the guys that pulled this off. So I would say that it's 99% certain that when Hoffa left the parking lot of the Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Township at around 2:45, July 30th, 1975, he was taken about 2 miles north, uh, driving on Telegraph Road to the Long Lake intersection, and was most likely killed at a location that was known as the House on the Hill, owned by a mob soldier by the name of Carlo Licata. It was a house that Hoffa was very familiar with, having sit downs with the people that he was going to meet that day, the Giacalone contingent, Tony Giacalone, who was the street boss of the Detroit Mafia. I believe he was kidnapped by Tony's brother, Billy Giacalone, the only member, the only suspect, I should say, that was not on the radar for law enforcement. He was unaccounted for that entire day. And I believe he was taken to that house and killed. Again, I'm pretty confident in saying, and I know that this is what the FBI believes as well right now, was killed by at that time, young up and coming mob soldier in Detroit named Anthony Tony Palazzolo, who used his role in that murder to parlay his mob career, you know, climb the ladder, if you will. Eventually became a crew boss, a capo, and then consigliere, the number three position in all the Detroit Mafia. He passed away from stomach cancer back in 2019. But before he died, the FBI and investigators had zeroed in on him. Most of this focus on Palazzolo hadn't occurred until the 2010s, and they had some information coming from some sources and whatnot. And right now, the official, unofficial, because they haven't come out and said it's official, but I know that what the belief of the FBI and the U.S. prosecutor right now is that Tony Palazzolo was Jimmy Hoffa's killer, and again probably killed at Carlo Licata's house. But I'll leave this answer, a very long-winded answer. I'll conclude it with Carlo Licata died at that same house 6 years almost to the minute at about 3 o'clock on July 30th, 1981. Hoffa was most likely killed at around 3 o'clock, July 30th, 1975. Licata was discovered deceased with gunshot wounds to his chest and the weapon about 10, 15 feet away from him without any prints on it. A lot of people believe that was a message that was connected to the Hoffa disappearance and murder 6 years before that.
And you must have a theory about his body as well and where that is, because everybody has looked everywhere. And it's very fascinating how many people are still so invested in wondering where his body is.
It's firmly embedded in the American pop culture fabric. It is mythology. Uh, it's Americana. It represents it's this true crime renaissance that we're in terms of content the last 10, 15 years. I think speaks to the voracious appetite of people that are fascinated by true crime and murder mysteries. This is the most talked about, most infamous unsolved crime in American history. And what I like to say is the mythology just feeds on itself, and gets bigger and more widespread the more we go along, looking for something that I don't believe there is to find. So the answer to your question is I think his body was most likely incinerated at Central Sanitation, which was about a 20-25 minute drive from where I believe he was killed. And then Central Sanitation, which was a mobbed up trash company, ended up burning down in an arson fire less than a year later, before the FBI could get in there with a search warrant. And the two of the principal people involved in the ownership of Central Sanitation, Jimmy Quazzarano and Peter Bazzi Vitali, were followed by FBI agents about 72 hours after Hoffa disappeared. These men went to New York and met with top-ranking New York mobsters, presumably to discuss the specifics of what had happened in Detroit 3 days before that. And those were the owners of the Central Sanitation company.
What made you so interested and so invested in this Jimmy Hoffa disappearance, and how did that lead up to learning all this new information?
It's something that I grew up literally surrounded by. The shopping center that he disappeared from was less than 5 minutes from my house. I often rode my bike into that shopping center and went to the drugstore, went to the grocery store, ate at the restaurant that he was kidnapped from, or the parking lot of the restaurant. So it was something that I felt like I had a calling for. It seemed very natural when I decided to be a crime reporter. I finished law school, and I'd been working in the Illinois Attorney General's office while I was in law school, and I got exposed to mob prosecutions, and I decided I kind of wanted to write about it instead of be a lawyer prosecuting it. And it seemed very natural to kind of come and stake my claim and plant my flag here in Detroit, and specifically tie it to this iconic murder mystery. And when people think of Jimmy Hoffa, there are just a wide gamut of thoughts on him as a person, thoughts on what happened to him, thoughts on why we still care almost 50 years later. It's a real hot button topic even now, and I don't think we'll ever have closure on this. I don't think you're ever going to have a body. You're never going to have any arrests. There's nobody alive to arrest. I'm hoping that come the 50-year anniversary in 2 years, there's some type of press conference, and the FBI and U.S. Attorney in Detroit shut this thing down, say that this is what we believe happened. These are the people that we believe did it, and we're closing the case.
And now, nearly 50 years later, the Hoffa case continues to captivate America. But like Wade said, Jimmy Hoffa disappeared, and he's still missing. From Live Now and Then, I'm Stephanie Weaver.